Hello and welcome to the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and I'm speaking today with Luke ten Hava. He's a investor in the resource sector, prolific on CEO.ca and Twitter, but he also is the founder of golddiscovery.com, and we will put a link to that site down below. It's a great resource tool for investors to get all kinds of information on companies from drilling news to breaking news, and we'll talk about that a little later. But I really want to start off the show since the PDAC just wrapped up in Toronto, the largest mining convention in the world. What were your key takeaways from that convention, Luke ten Have?
Thanks, Chad. Well, happy to be back on the show, first of all. And yeah, just returned from Toronto. And I can talk about sentiment, but I think most people can look at the chart and judge sentiment. It was pretty bad over the last couple of years, I think, but it may be turning. So there was a bit of optimism. So everybody's hoping that this is the real deal this time. And who knows? We will find out soon. But there were many interesting stories. I actually enjoyed this conference more than any of the recent PDACs I've been through. Partly because I met some interesting companies, partly because it was just an interesting week. I think it was a bit of good sentiment.
Well, and you had mentioned to me that sometimes when you go to these conventions, you're able to get some quality time with management teams. You're able to take a story that maybe you understand and just talk through some things and maybe come away with a different understanding. And maybe share that experience with people just that haven't been to a convention before, as far as why it's a benefit as an investor to not just read the company's slide deck or news, but also to talk to management teams.
Yeah, it's extremely important. I'm going to the conferences now for 8 years, every year, a number of times. And when you get to know the people and they tell you the story a number of times in detail and the updates, you really have a different view on it. You can read the press releases. And of course, if you would read them all from beginning to end, time after time, you would probably also get it. But often you need a bit of context to understand the situation. And I really think that I have invested in a couple of names in the past that I would never have picked if I didn't talk to the company and got a bit of context. And that is not to say that you need any, secret information, but it's really enough sometimes to get context. And the nice one this time was Delta Resources, where I invested, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago, and got the timing a bit lucky because the stock made a discovery. The company made a discovery and went from 5 cents to 60 cents. And the 5 cents was the low point, by the way. It was trading a bit higher before that, but they made a good discovery. They had these big intercepts, pretty low grade, but suddenly they found this higher grade extension to the east. And they realized that all these gold intercepts, things like 90 meters of 1.5 grams, like really bulk tonnage, also some lower grade, by the way, on to the west, like 0.6, 0.7 grams, that this was continuing to the east, and that it was marked by this magnetic low. And they have a geological explanation for why they think they had this mag low over there. I'm not going to try to explain that, but you can see on the maps that they had this very deep blue target, because the more they were going to the east, the target became very dark blue, and they could see like it was almost like a perfect corresponding picture to where they find the gold intercepts. So the market got really, really excited about this deep blue zone, as they called it, and the stock went to 60 cents. And they financed at that price, I think 45 or 50 cents. And then they started drilling that area and didn't really find much. And you can see what happened to the chart. The stock went to 9 cents again. And they were a bit confused, I think. At least I would explain it like that, but maybe they would just say like, hey, we are trying to understand this. And they did some more surveys, including a 3D IP survey. And as it looks right now, they have a number of faults over there. And I'm not a geo, so I'm not trying to go into too much detail. But it seems that this complete system rotated based on the IP. And they wrote some words about that in the press release. And I was reading a little bit about it, but I completely missed it. And when they showed it to me and explained it to me on Verify and in their deck, it was like, wow, they completely drilled down dip. So they completely missed the zone. So if this theory is true and it completely dips to the other direction, it could be that all these holes which were drilled in one direction missed the complete system, and they simply need to turn the drill rig and drill in the other direction. And that would completely explain why this deep blue zone is there, because they have the system to the west, but suddenly it stopped, even though the signature was still there. And of course, this is a concept, this is a theory, and I saw the images, they were pretty interesting. If you explain it, you think, well, I've heard the story before, but when you see this modeled in 3D, you think, well, if this is true, then it could be very serious. So as a result, I bought a little bit of Delta, and I think some other people heard about it as well and started buying because the stock is up a little bit, but was also sold off quite a lot. And just read the recent press releases; they talk about it, but you need a little bit of context and seeing these images and get a bit of context about what they think. And I wouldn't say this is a slam dunk yet. The safer way is just to wait for those drill results, and if one of those holes really hit 100 grams again, perhaps at 2 grams or 1.5 grams, then this signature is going for another 2 kilometers. So instead of having 1.5 kilometer of system, they may have 4 kilometer of system. And they also released all the drill holes and all the details you need to model it, because they want to give the audience the chance to start modeling themselves and to calculate a resource. And I had someone make a calculation and then use some parameters like 10 grams capping, because they have a bit of nuggety in there, and a 0.3 as a cutoff grade. And this person came to 2.2 million ounces at 1.4 grams, which is already quite significant for an open pit system next to the highway. So they have infrastructure, everything is over there. There's no metallurgy yet, so there's a bit of risk on that front. But yeah, one example where you can really follow a company for many years, but not noticing the difference by reading their news releases. And then when they explain a little bit more why they think this is happening, then you think, oh, wow, this could be a complete game changer. I wouldn't call it the game changer right now, but I would wait for the drill results to prove this concept, and then it could be a game changer. So yeah, quite exciting, I think.
Well, I appreciate you breaking that down on Delta Resources. I'm actually not familiar with the company, but I will follow up and check on those drill results as they come out and see if the thesis plays out. But I think that's a great story about how I think we all read through news releases and get a little glazed over. And when we're going through it, we miss key details, or people jump to conclusions, or you'll go into a chat room and the direction of the chat room will be going one direction and the thesis. You'll call up a company, or we jump on Zoom calls all the time with companies, and we'll run some of these ideas by them. Like, no, that's not at all what we're talking about in this press release. So I think it's always important, rather than getting stuck into narratives, to just reach out to management teams if you have a serious question, or if you don't quite understand a news release. They're usually happy to break down with an interested investor what they actually said in the news release and what the key takeaways are. And sometimes it's much different than what the market is thinking. And sometimes the price action, they're just confused by what's happening because they think something is good news, and it turns out that the market interpreted it as bad news, or vice versa. Sometimes you talk to management teams, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but you'll think, gosh, they don't seem very excited about that. It makes me more concerned now. So maybe just speak to, in the past, you've had a lot of investments where reaching out to management teams changed what you even invested in and which companies you invested in.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the better you get to know these people, you can read them a little bit. I mean, some people are not very excited by nature. I mean, they are very systematic and just want to see everything proved out before they get excited. And some people get very, very excited just because they have a red blob on the map. So it's when you get to know these people, you also get a bit of a feel for how quickly they get excited about stuff. Because I guess you can listen to 1,000 stories and get excited about 800 of them if you believe the promoter. So you have to get to know them a little bit. And, for Delta, it's a really like André Tessier is a geo in Quebec for, I think, almost 30 years and has been involved with many companies. And this is probably his best discovery so far. And yeah, what I just explained, you can read that in the March 1 news release where they talk about the system potentially being rotated along the structure. But it's you need to get to know people to notice these things. And I had the same thing with Azimuth a couple of years ago, where I noticed the Elmer discovery quite early, but of course there's always uncertainty. When you're looking at a project that's not drilled yet and you're getting more excited, you also realize there's no certainty here. They can find all kinds of stuff on surface, but they also need to still drill it. And only that's the real proof. But you can, if you follow the complete from concept to drill program stage, then you at least know the complete picture of what they have done. And then you can also interpret those drill results when they come in. And maybe people who will see Delta drill another 2 grams over 100 meters will not experience that as a really positive thing, because they may think, oh, it's just an infill hole, and and they will just ignore it. And I think it could be different this time. I just want to warn that I think they still have to drill those holes. So if they release any more holes in the coming weeks, that may not be the one. You really have to look at these this deep blue zone if you are interested in this story.
Okay, appreciate the extra context there. And there's definitely another company I want to bring up that put out some news today, and it's a story that you and I both follow, and we both talked to the management team for years, and that is Aurion Resources. Some news broke just today that Aurion Resources received notice from B2Gold, which is their joint venture partner in Finland, that Rupert Resources has made an offer to buy out B2Gold's 70% interest in the JV project. Of course, Aurion Resources also has a first right of refusal in there, and there's some different components to this, but I'd just be curious to get your thoughts. We only talked about this for about 30 seconds before this call, but we agreed it'd be a good one to discuss just because it's breaking news in the sector. It speaks to the nature of joint ventures, and it also speaks to the nature of several majors being involved, Agnico Eagle being involved with Rupert, B2Gold, and Kinross being involved with Aurion. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I was completely surprised to see this news show up this morning. I I met with Maddie and Dave last week during the PDAC, and we even talked a little bit about how will this play out. And apparently over the weekend something happened because B2Gold. I don't know if it's a real deal yet, because Rupert said they confirmed this news release, but they said that they are still in negotiations. But it's probably the start of something that a lot of people knew was coming at some point, just not when and how. And it seems that B2Gold is selling their 70% stake to Rupert for about $103 million. Well, in shares, that is. And that would value Aurion's stake at 44 million. But Aurion also has this right of first refusal. And I think you cannot really discount that right now because that's a very extremely important thing for them. If you look at other deals played out in the past, you cannot understate how important it is. But really, why is it Rupert wants to make this move? And I think it's, we both know this company quite well, but Rupert has, one of the best gold discoveries in years and maybe even in decades. And it sits right against the B2Gold Aurion border. And Rupert said in the PEA that the Ikari open pit was constrained by the boundary and that this is the transition point between open pit and underground operations. So there's an economic impact, in other words, by this border, which they already admitted in their PEA, and they have a couple of scenarios in the PEA as well, like how could we, they also have the scenario where they own that ground or where they at least can use that ground, the B2Gold Aurion ground. And that it actually is happening right now is interesting. It gives Aurion 60 days to potentially use the ROFR and pay $103 million for the complete project. Is Aurion capable to do it? Will they get some help from other companies? That's the big question. And I think the coming 2 months are going to be very interesting to see how this plays out and if any other company will join this fight.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this. I'm fascinated because of the consolidation of this whole area in Finland. Again, because recently we also saw Agnico Eagle take a stake in FireFox, which is nearby this property as well. And Agnico Eagle also involved with Rupert. But people forget that Kinross has a 10% stake in Aurion, and maybe they could come and bring some capital into the project, or maybe somebody that's completely outside of all three of those large companies, B2Gold, Kinross, and Agnico Eagle, could also come in to help Aurion out. But it's just going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think everybody sees that eventually all these projects need to be consolidated by some larger company. The question is, who is it going to be, and are we going to see an old-fashioned bidding war? So it's going to be interesting to keep following along with how this develops. I just wanted to get your hot take on it. And then I also want to just get into something we've talked about before and maybe dive in a little more detail, just jumping around to different ideas here. And that is the way that some of these projects are approached in North America or Europe are sometimes different than the way they're approached in Australia. And what I mean by that is when you see things in North America or North American companies operating abroad, so if they're Canadian or US, they usually develop a project, get it to a point, bring in some strategic partners like we've seen in Finland, and then hopefully somebody takes them out. But when you think about investing in Australia, a lot of those companies have a totally different mindset where they go in and they build a team of people that maybe include mining engineers or people that have been mine builders before. And when they're looking at exploration, they're already looking at it with the eye of, do we want to build this or not? So I think this is also a great example of maybe just breaking down the differences in North American markets with the strategic stakeholders and the takeover model versus the Aussie model of let's just build this thing.
Yeah, completely. And I think also the markets are a little bit different as well, right? There are a lot of more risk takers on the ASX, punters, as people call them, betting on discoveries. And companies like Adriatic Metals, they just continue to actually build the project. And Sandfire was another one in 2009, I think, when they discovered their project and actually started building it quite soon. But I think also the market needs to be there for it. In Canada, people don't like starting with a small mine to fund the bigger mine. If you start with that proposition, people typically run away. So maybe that's changing a little bit now that those ASX companies did better over the last couple of years than the TSX-V companies. And maybe those ASX companies actually will come to Canada to actually become the acquirer and help the TSX-V a little bit by buying those companies if those companies are not building it themselves. Because those valuations are probably a little bit more at a premium compared to the Canadians, and they also have a bit more liquidity than the Canadians. I did a comparison a couple of months ago where I made a couple of lists and companies that are comparable to each other. Companies just exploring for gold or companies already made a discovery. And if you really compare them one to one, you see that those volumes sometimes are 4x or to 10x actually. If a stock trades at $30,000 a day in Canada, they could trade at $300,000 a day in Australia. So there's way more liquidity. And only rarely do you see that on the TSX-V, like recently with the Ken Alaska discovery and the Hercules Silver discovery. Then you really see volume picking up and millions of dollars going into those names. But the average story doesn't get the attention yet. And that's different in Australia.
Well, what do you make of that? We actually had an interesting chat, you and I, just when we were at the MIF in Vancouver, and I think I saw you again at VRIC, and we kept chatting about the Aussie stocks. Now, some of them have rolled over a little bit compared to how they were doing the last couple of years, but there's no denying there's so much more liquidity in those. Do you think some of it has to do with, like, particularly in Canadian companies, they do these flow-through financings or these financings where some investors don't actually care about the company. They're getting in to get tax breaks. And when they're doing these flow-through financings, they're not really betting on the company. It seems like in the Aussie markets, the Australian investors really are betting on the project. Do you think that has anything to do with it, or why do you think there's such a difference in the liquidity between the two markets?
Well, I think the market is in a way a bit deeper. I mean, the US, of course, has the deepest financial market in the world. But if you look at the resource markets, Canada versus Australia, there's way more institutional investors in Australia that are playing with, I think even retirement funds invest in that resource space. It's really crucial. And I think it leads to, there's also more risk takers. If you look at hot copper, the number of people that are betting there on plays is also very different. So I think there's a couple of reasons why there's simply more liquidity over there. And typically these things also end at some point. We've seen that like 10 years ago, I think, when there was also an imbalance between these two markets. And at some point, these things will come in balance again. If things stay undervalued for a long time, at some point, these other companies from across the world, they will come over and start investing. And whatever event is going to create that this time is uncertain, I think, but it's not unlikely that the Canadian market will be balanced with the ASX again at some point. The ASX also benefited from a lot of these lithium discoveries and rare earth discoveries. And I think the Canadian markets didn't really profit as much from it. And in terms of the flow through, yeah, I think it's a big benefit to Canadian companies. You see it in Quebec a lot, but it also makes companies struggle. And I think more and more investors get educated on it. It actually happened with Delta, the company that I talked about earlier. I didn't buy their placement, their 28-cent placement in 2021, because I knew there were some flow-through funds participating. And even before the essays came out, those funds liquidated after 4 months. And that brought the stock back to 5 cents. So from 28 cents to 5 cents. And the company was trading at cash valuations at that point. And that's also where I sometimes see the benefit of, as an investor, if you follow these stories and you know why the company is trading at 5 cents, it makes the decision much easier because the company didn't really change much. They were just drilling and there were no assays yet. And, this stock gets sold down and people may sell in a panic. But if you really know that this company, that flow-through funds are participating without a real back-end buyer who is interested in owning the stock, the likelihood of the stock going down after 4 months is real. And you see it over and over again. And with Delta, I used that event to buy at 5 cents. And I typically wait for 4 months not to get too excited too early if these placements happen.
Well, Luke10Have, I just want to maybe spend a moment and give you a hat tip, because I think a lot of people follow your thoughts on different chat boards, on different social media sites, and also follow your website because you just look at things a little different. Like every time I talk to you, if we run into each other at a show or if we just have a moment to chat, I know that you're always looking at companies with a critical eye and you just catch things that other people don't. And you've built a site to try to help investors do the same thing. And it's because you're able to parse a lot of information quickly that I think you're able to see things that stand out to you that are just unique. And a lot of times the thesis you have plays out. It doesn't happen every time for every investor, but you've got a good track record of digging through information and finding a few gems in the rough. Explain to investors how the site that you've built, golddiscovery.com, is designed to help investors do the same thing, to dig through a lot of information and maybe find a few of the pearls.
Yeah, and I'm actually changing the strategy a little bit because I realize that people typically think a bit different than I do. And if I cannot reach enough people with my way of thinking, then I may have to change towards people's thinking. But no, the site golddiscovery.com, the way it is right now, it has many, many features. And I think 20% of them are quite popular, 80% of them are almost never being used. We built too much too quickly. And that's why we are going to completely change the site. We've built a lot of features over the last couple of months, but I decided not to release them because I felt, like most junior miners, that they were not making an impact anyway. And so we are lining up many new features, a completely new site, also a new site, a different concept that we are building and almost completing right now. So maybe the best way to follow that is to go to the Gold Discovery One Twitter page, because I will certainly share there when we have some new sites and new features to release. And I don't know yet exactly when I will do that. I will probably do it when I feel like it can make a bit of an impact to the market. I'm not in a hurry, but it will probably not take months and months anymore. So the site itself, you can use it still to do a lot of due diligence and filter your way through those companies, look at who owns, which companies are cashed up, which companies have good share structures. You can follow the news, you can look into discoveries. But that site will be the old site, as I will refer to in the future, because we are building a new site and a very different concept that will be released in a couple of weeks, perhaps a month or two.
Okay, so people should follow you on the Twitter site for Gold Discovery to be able to get those updates as they come out. But for right now, we're still going to link to what you're calling the old site, because I think there are a lot of valuable tools on there. You do have a really great filtering system where you can use checkboxes to just narrow down the scope of the companies you're looking at or what kind of a news you're looking at. And so whether it's drill news or different economic studies or, updates, there's all kinds of ways to filter the information and really drive down into the particular niche you're looking at. So we'll link to that down below. Appreciate you spending some time with us at the KE Report. It's always fun to talk to you, man, and I'm sure we'll do this again sometime soon because there's about a million other questions I'd love to ask you, but we definitely appreciate you spending some time with us here at the KE Report and looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Jet. Really appreciate it.